What's up, DS3 TV? We are back for another video, and this one is Miscellaneous Myths. Quetzalcoatl? I don't know how to say it, but yeah, this one. I mean, it's a dragon in it. I think I seen the thumbnail, so that's gonna be fun. But yeah, let's get into it, and yeah, this should be all fun and stuff like that. So. Yeah, also subscribe to the channel. I want to get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday, September 13th. Also, recommend me videos down in the comment section down below. If you, yeah, recommend me videos in the comment section down below. And also, yeah, go to my Twitch and the link in the description and subscribe to that. I mean, follow that. Click the heart and follow. My Twitch is down, link description down below. And yeah, gonna have some fun on there. Probably in about a week. So yeah, should be fun. Hopefully everybody's doing good with school and stuff like that if they're back in school. So yeah, I don't go back until like September, but it's fine. It's fine. But yeah, let's get into it and play.
Hey, here's a fun thing people seem to forget. Ancient cultures were cultures, as in they changed. See, looking back on them, it's easy to see ancient cultures as these static, creed-based civilizations where everyone lived the same way for hundreds of years and worshipped a multi-theistic pantheon that never underwent any significant changes, and then when the civilization fell apart, everyone in the civilization presumably evaporated or spontaneously mummified themselves.
Yep, they just disappeared.
So obviously all Romans wore togas, all Norsemen were seafaring Vikings, and ancient Japan was all katanas and kimonos, which, by the way, would be a good name for a feudal Japan role-playing game. But obviously that's super not true. Just like America's gone from being a universally Christian and European nation to a multicultural melting pot in less than 300 years, ancient civilizations underwent religious and cultural changes all the time. Like, for a big example, ancient Greek worship of the Hellenistic pantheon, which is almost the quintessential ancient pantheon and ancient civilization combo, wasn't ever one consistent thing. Sure, there was a broad-scale state religion, but it was supplemented by dozens, if not hundreds, of localized cults that honored specific deities, and whatever cults were more prominent at any given time also determined what gods were more prominent in worship overall. Stuff was constantly in flux, and as a result, most myths have at least a handful of variant tellings as a result of localization and disparate cult interpretations.
Yep, and that's how, and also, just because it's vocal, like, everything was, like, talked down, like, stories were talked down to their children and stuff like that, so stories gets, turned differently, and, especially, like, with how the climate is in that time for that culture. So yeah, things change.
There's basically no canon as a result of this natural drift, and in a more dramatic version than choose your own adventure myths, sometimes you had total theistic overhauls as a result of key events in a culture's history. So today we'll be talking about the quintessential Mesoamerican god, the one basically everyone has at least heard about, and even better, the one that had his own Indiana Jones-style cult and a dinosaur named after him. Let's talk Quetzalcoatl. But as we've just discussed,
Quetzalcoatl. Okay, I can say it now. I can say it. It's fine.
cultures change, and Quetzalcoatl is an old god, even by Mesoamerican standards. He doesn't have any broad-scale consistent myths or stories, or at least none that we know about anymore. So before I get into the details of how the cult of the feathered serpent became culturally ubiquitous in Mesoamerica, it's time for a history lesson. So the feathered serpent's story begins way back in the lost and found city of Teotihuacan, but Quetzalcoatl only gets codified when the Aztec Empire forms almost 1700 years after that. So let's start there, because it's a starting point that most of us have at least a little bit of understanding of. In my Huitzilopochtli video, I talked about Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, which was sacred to the sun god Huitzilopochtli, and in Huitzilopochtli's origin story, we touched on the birth of Quetzalcoatl, a happy, fun deity of arts and crafts who also happened to be an enormous f*** dragon. What was interesting—
That's where I heard it from, because, yeah, we watched that video. I was like, what? What are you talking about? Because I was like, I had looked it up, like, for at least for, like, the past, like, 10 minutes, on my channel, like, to see, like, hey, like, didn't I watch this? Like, didn't I watch this video before? Like, I got, like, an itchy feeling I watched it, but no, I watched the video that, like, mentioned it. So, yeah.
About that myth is that it doesn't actually explain anything about Quetzalcoatl. Certainly not to the same level of detail that it explains Huitzilopochtli and Coyolxauhqui. He's just kind of not there one minute and there the next, and then they move on. So clearly, Quetzalcoatl was already a major player in the Aztec belief system even before this myth got codified, or he would have warranted a more detailed explanation for why we should care. So where did he come from? Well, the Aztec civilization only really got big in the 14th century, but the people who would become part of the Aztecs, who at this point in history were the Nahua, specifically the Mexica, started migrating into central Mexico as early as the 6th century. They found founded Tenochtitlan in the 1300s and started putting together their empire. Now, Huitzilopochtli wasn't that much of a big-shot deity at this point. He'd been relatively small potatoes in the Nahua religion. But after the Aztec Empire was formed in an alliance between three major tribes, this guy Tlacaelel, who had organized the Triple Alliance in the first place, decided to pull an Akhenaten and totally revamp the Nahuatl religion, elevating the former nobody god Huitzilopochtli up to full-scale solar deity and city patron. That's how we got the fun and the sun god we all know and love, and also how we got such a clear-cut origin story for him. It was a government-mandated myth, and frankly, the Aztecs didn't last long enough for it to drift. So if the Aztec/Nahuatl religion underwent such a total overhaul in the early 1400s, what was it like before? And does this maybe explain where Quetzalcoatl actually came from? Well, remember how I brought up Teotihuacan a couple paragraphs ago? Let's go way back, 1700 years before the Aztecs, to 300 BCE, 900 years before the Nahua people entered the scene, and back when nomadic tribes were first starting to form settlements in Mesoamerica. In 200 BCE, somebody, and we still don't know who, starts building Teotihuacan. Within 300 years, by 100 AD, the Pyramid of the Sun, the most impressive building in Teotihuacan, has been completed. By 450 AD, the civilization in Teotihuacan is at the height of its power and influence. References to their people are found all over Mesoamerica, and evidence of their architectural and art style are similarly common. It's an industrial center and produces all kinds of art, incredible paintings and murals, as well as obsidian tools. The population is estimated to be 125,000 people at least, which would make it the 6th largest city in the world at this point in history. Teotihuacan is functionally an empire a full 1,000 years before the Aztecs are a thing. And side note, the city layout of Teotihuacan is...
And it's so terrible, like, I'm just thinking about, like, how, like, history books that have you think, like, oh yeah, these were, like, primitive tribes, they couldn't do anything, like, compared to, like, the Europeans and stuff like that. They were, like, very highly sophisticated tribes, just as good as the British and everybody else. It's just that they didn't have, you know, they didn't have that evil side to them that Britain did. And that's just how I can say it. Like, Britain had a very evil side to them. I mean, well, not Britain technically, but not Britain. I mean, sorry. England. I mean, the Spaniards. Yes, the Spaniards doing the conquest and stuff like that. They had a very evil side to them.
Incredibly beautiful. They had a grid. Then around the 6th century, the population of Teotihuacan starts declining. Around the 7th century, the buildings housing the rulers of Teotihuacan are burned to the ground, and several statues are shattered, with their pieces being deliberately scattered. Shortly thereafter, the city is completely abandoned, and just like that, a great civilization is gone. And no, we don't know why. That's what makes this fun. The current theory is that there was some kind of internal unrest, maybe even a civil uprising, possibly fueled by some climate-shifting-induced droughts that we know occurred around 500 AD. But we still don't know for sure why the city was abandoned. Now, we know next to nothing about the civilization and gods of Teotihuacan, on account of it being a lost civilization and all, but conveniently they left enough murals and statues to give us a rough idea of a few major players. First off, continuing the tradition of Mesoamerican deities being f***ing terrifying, the patron goddess of Teotihuacan looked like this. And though we don't know any of their names, she's called alternately the Great Goddess of Teotihuacan or Teotihuacan Spider-Woman. Yikes. Other players in the Teotihuacan pantheon included the Storm God, the Old God, the Netted Jaguar, the Polk God, the Fat God, the oh-so-charming Flayed God.
Why do all of them, like, they have such cool names, and they look so cool. This is Xepi Toltec, the Aztec Flayed God of springtime and agriculture, mostly because I couldn't find a representation of Teotihuacan one. Of the Teotihuacan one. Okay.
And the feathered serpent. This, the feathered serpent on the side of the 3rd largest pyramid in Teotihuacan, is the first recognizable reference to the god that would come to be known by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, although it is worth noting that the earliest representation of feathered serpents, although not necessarily as a singular deity, date all the way back to the Olmecs in 900 BC. Now obviously, cultures swap gods all the time, the Romans being particularly egregious in this regard. And while the flayed god also shows up later in a few places as a god of household chores, the man has no skin! The feathered serpent appears to be by far the biggest contribution that Teotihuacan affected on the greater Mesoamerican belief system. And unlike the Romans, who took totally separate gods and acted like they were the same under different names, in this case, the Mesoamerican feathered serpent really does seem to be all the same god, but known by different names in different tribes. The Nahuatl called him Quetzalcoatl, while the Yucatec Mayans called him Kukulkan, and the Quiche Maya called him Cucumats. I'm definitely saying that wrong, I apologize. Pretty much every Mesoamerican tribe had a feathered serpent, some kind of interpretation of the original Teotihuacan god. And given that Teotihuacan had clearly been a trade hub, it kind of makes sense that some of their gods might have gone out along trade routes. Quetzalcoatl Quetzalcoatl is functionally much, much older and more widely worshipped than any of the other Aztec deities, which you can actually kind of tell just by virtue of how little is said about him. Don't follow? See, old gods have a tendency to fade into cultural ubiquity because everybody worships them, everybody knows them, so why would they write about something everybody already knows?
Yeah.
It would be like if somebody wrote a step-by-step instruction manual on how to operate a flush toilet or made a 20-foot sculpted frieze describing the fitness gram pacer test. Why would you do that? So as a result, we find terse references that imply a backstory we can't find and maybe stories that weren't even written down because they were probably just known by everybody. Whereas Huitzilopochtli's single noteworthy story is perfectly documented, the feathered serpent is a mess of fragmented legends frequently referencing facts or events that probably used to be well known. There are very scattered myths describing his birth, but most of them sound kinda like, and this was the birth of Quetzalcoatl, with no further explanation about who he is or why it's a big deal, like it's some big pop culture reference or a sweet cameo everyone would get. There's a Yucatec Maya version where his birth story is basically that a snake is born to a human family, and his older sister explicitly recognizes the snake as the feathered serpent god. So he's clearly a pre-existing player, and not even his origin stories properly explain where he comes from. And in contrast, Huitzilopochtli's origin story explicitly ends with a why you should care explanation, assigning him the ability to keep the world from getting eaten. Quetzalcoatl never gets that treatment, probably because he never had to, which means us modern people, who lack the cultural ubiquity and the context that would have existed at the time, have no idea what his general deal was. But anyway, moving on from that bout of rampant theorizing, given the fact that there were so many fascinating Lovecraftian gods in Teotihuacan, why was it that only the feathered serpent got so popular? Why not the flayed guy or that jaguar thing? Well, according to some theories, the feathered serpent had the advantage of some hefty symbolism to help him get so popular to begin with. First off, although dragons may make sense to us now, the concept of a flying snake is kind of an inherent contradiction if you think about it. Since he could fly, he was inherently divine, but his snakeness also made him earthly. A being that was both of heaven and of earth was potentially a useful bit of dualism. Maybe that's why the feathered serpent ended up with such a prolific cult, although the word cult kind of has wrong implications. But regardless, after...
It does have wrong implications, but we understand what you mean. We understand.
Perhaps even before the fall of Teotihuacan, feathered serpent worship and iconography spread all over the place. Everywhere his influence landed, he was interpreted in a different way. The Nahua saw him as a god of the winds and of creativity, while the Quiche Maya had him as a creator deity with an affiliation with wind and rain, who also carried the sun god Tohil through the sky. The Lacandon Maya, meanwhile, saw him as less of a fun god and more of a giant monster that also happened to be a pet of the sun god. There were recurring trends. Usually he had some affiliation with the wind or the weather, and was at least tangentially related to the sun, but there's no real consistency in his characterization. Despite that, the feathered serpent was ubiquitous. The subsistence farming Yucatec Maya even used the ubiquity of the feathered serpent cult to facilitate trade and communication with other tribes. Now, because the feathered serpent was such a ubiquitous but subdivided figure, it's practically impossible to pin down anything resembling solid mythology about him. I mean, hell, the Aztecs reimagined him as mostly human, which has caused some people to theorize that their image of Quetzalcoatl was modified by anything from a very lost Viking to straight up Jesus. This is also why he can seem so inconsistent in his overall characterization. He kinda doesn't have one. He had one to begin with, but this is what happens when cultures last for thousands of years. Stuff drifts. The feathered serpent is more than just Quetzalcoatl. He's an ancient deity anywhere from 2200 to 3000 years old that we can only get a proper glimpse of through the dozens of different interpretations that the tribes of Mesoamerica assigned to him over the millennia, which is super cool, but also kind of Lovecraftian. I mean, those Teotihuacan placeholder god names sound straight up at the Mountains of Madness. The flayed god? Seriously? Look out, new world, here we come.
This video turned out to be a bit more historical than I meant it to. I mean, it seems like it.
Brave, intrepid, and then some.
Don't worry, we won't tell them.
Pioneers of maximum audacity, whose resume.
If you get a chance to visit Teotihuacan, take it. It's gorgeous, even if they don't let you climb the pyramids anymore. Oh, that's cool. That's still cool that they used to let you climb the pyramids. That's pretty cool.
Maze, show that we are just the team to live where others merely dream. Build it.
Wear sunscreen. Don't be like me. Did you know that you could get blisters from 7 days of cumulative sunburn? Huh. Did not know that. Good thing to know before going to Arizona.
Up ahead of steam on the trail we blaze.
Yeah, so that was a great video. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video. Also subscribe to the channel. I want to get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday, September 13th. And recommend me videos down in the comment section down below. And yes, cut the link down in the description for my Twitch. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.